Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here. We are recording this for the purpose of sharing this via Cliff Notes. So when we do some Q&A, we will ask that we use the handheld mic so that we can try and capture those questions in the recording so that folks who aren't able to be here in person and our virtual community are able to have this experience. So thank you for carving out some time on your Sunday afternoon to learn more about all of the, well, not all of, but all of? Do we have enough time? But especially the most important and significant pieces of legislation that are being shared to the General Conference happening 9 days from now. And you heard me talk a little bit about this. But just as a point of polity, I think it's really helpful to understand and to know that the General Conference of the United Methodist Church is the only body that speaks on behalf of the denomination. So the General Conference is the only body, the only entity, the only manifestation or iteration of the church that speaks for the United Methodist denomination, which is why it's a significant and important part of our denominational life, and why our presence, the presence of progressive and affirming caucus groups like RMN, Reconciling Ministries Network, the Love of Your Neighbor Coalition, all these other groups, why that presence is so significant and important. So you have some Starbursts that are being passed out. Taste the rainbow. We decided it's Skittles, but it's okay. It's also Starburst. And I'm going to hand it. Yeah, it's the same conglomerate. I'm just going to turn it over to our panel who are going to be sharing, and then we'll have some time for Q&A and a special witness and invitation from Aaron. So I'm going to pass it over to Bobby Rudock.
Okay. So I was tasked with talking a little bit about the removal of harmful language. And I just want to start that it was only about 3 weeks ago. Like, I've been involved in all these meetings and all this stuff, and I've heard the 3 R's and the regionalization, revised social principles, and removal of harmful language over and over and over and over. And it was only about 3 weeks ago that the word removal finally clicked. And I think Clifton was hoping for more. I know I was hoping for more. There's a lot of legislation in there with sexual orientation added to these phrases of race, gender, and so forth. And so I just want to be really clear with the Clifton community rather than feeling a level of disappointment later, to understand that there's a lot of support around removal. There's not a lot of even effort behind the legislation that adds affirming statements. So it took me conversations with multiple people to reach a place where I was a little more okay with that. I can't say I'm okay with it, but to reach a place where I was a little more okay with it, and trying to vote with the caucuses rather than vote my conscience. As everyone delivers tissues. So I want Clifton to understand that going in, because I don't want us to be blindsided. And I know Robert's mentioned it several times. I know we've heard in the announcement about this event right now, that phrase, but even in the middle of it, I somehow did not catch exactly what removal meant until just a few weeks ago. Yeah. Go ahead and I'll look into yours.
Are you really, anything else you want to say?
So, what removal gets us to is and what the goal has now become is regionalization, is neutral to try to help with the efforts for regionalization. And I don't remember which one of them was supposed to talk about regionalization, but I'm going to touch it just a little. An effort to make the United States a conference of its own, rather than, and there's so many people in the group that know so much that I don't want to misspeak, but to make the United States a conference on the same level that each of the central conferences is. And so the central conferences can revise the Book of Discipline, certain parts of the Book of Discipline, to their context, but the United States cannot. All of the United States legislation has to go in front of the General Conference, which means all of these folks, there's 862 delegates, almost half of them this time are Central Conference delegates, and they're voting on legislation that is for U.S. pensions or U.S. property rules or things that have no connection to their position in the church. And so the regionalization would put the United States in that same position where we could modify the Book of Discipline to our context, and where General Conference could then be focused on a more like godly part of the church rather than legislation that doesn't apply internationally. There was something else that popped into my head for a second. It'll come back.
Okay.
David's going to talk.
Well, hi, everybody. It's good to be home. It's great to see you all. I think I know everybody in the room. So if I don't, and if you want to know more about my particular story, I'm happy to tell it. But I think I'm going to pass on that with the time that we have. A couple of things that I sort of wanted to share. One is to help everyone have kind of the whole context of what this General Conference is going to be. We've just come through 50 years of a divided denomination around the differences in understanding the mission of the church and who Jesus Christ is, and our understanding of the Bible and how to interpret or read it, and how those essential ideas get turned into practices against people, and particularly we've seen it against women and against persons, LGBTQ folks, and even people of other colors, and people in other nations who in a former time we might have termed third world, or places that were the recipients of our mission and colonialism. And so we have that history. We got at least 50 years of that, if not more, since the merger in 1968. So that's part of our context. Part of the context is in the midst of all of that, there has been a faithful, not just remnant, but there's been a faithful large proportion of the United Methodist Church over those years that has wanted to move into a place that the Spirit informs, Jesus leads, and it's a fuller, more expansive understanding of who Jesus is and how the Spirit works in the world and how the church accomplishes that mission, which includes treating everybody as beloved children of God. And building all of the mission and ministry and actions from that place. So that's not insignificant, that there's been a huge component of the church working for that. Clifton United Methodist Church is one part of it. But that has led to the past, in 2019, 5 years ago, the St. Louis General Conference, and the decision of the church to go in a much more conservative way, to increase punishments toward LGBTQ folks, to tighten the grip for power and money by the conservative wing of the church. I'm not going to go into all the alphabet soup of who they are and all of that. But that was going on. And when the 2020 General Conference didn't happen because of COVID, those who were wanting to lock down the church, I find that an interesting phrase in this Easter season, but trying to lock down the church and to sort of make everyone abide by a certain sense of autocratic rule from the top down. I'm biased, I know. That COVID struck, and they could not wait any longer. And so we've had 2 years of disaffiliation. So persons who have left the church, either as congregations or as clergy, that number's 25% of the United Methodist Church, mostly in the United States, mostly in the South, and mostly in former strong Evangelical United Brethren conferences like Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Indiana. So that's that has happened, and at the same time, the broader United Methodist Church in the U.S. at the time of electing people to go to the 2020 General Conference decided that they wanted a much more progressive group of people to go to General Conference and jurisdictional conferences when they voted in 2019 on the heels of that bad St. Louis General Conference. And so the body of people that were going to gather in 20 was much more progressive in its makeup. Now that's just the US portion. There's still the international portion of Africa, Philippines, and Europe, and some of Asia. So the context then becomes, after disaffiliation, a whole lot of folks were no longer Methodist. And so they'd been elected to serve, and they were not going to be allowed to serve because they're no longer United Methodist. So then new people were elected, and almost all of them were even more progressive than the first folks that were elected. So if we're to count the numbers, there are 432 delegates out of 862 that are from the U.S. So that's more than half from the U.S. And the folks who are doing the counting of heads and votes have discovered that 80 of those votes would be of a more conservative bend now. Only 80 out of 432. So just think about that. So 382 are going to be progressive, and they'll vote for everything that Bobby's worried isn't going to happen. Even all of these things that would be affirming, they're going to vote for them when they come up, because that's what their conscience tells them. Even though there's all kinds of other things, when any person, a voter at General Conference, is given a binary choice, yes or no, do we include sexual orientation, as one of the statuses that are fully included and embraced in the United Methodist Church, a large chunk are going to vote for it. Whether it's 50% plus one is the question. And then Bobby's critique is whether anybody is organizing for it. And that's the thing that's sad, that there's no organizing for it. But it's going to happen, and the votes are going to be taken. So that's the context. Let me just give you those numbers if you're interested. Let me be precise and look at my notes. 56% of all the delegates are from the U.S. So 862 delegates. So my number was wrong. 483 are the portion that are from the U.S. 483. And that number, if they all voted together, would pass all of the legislation that we'd like to see passed. But of that 483, 403 of them are centrist and progressive and liberal. 80% are conservative. There are 32% of the delegates are from Africa. That's 276. 6% are Filipino. That's 52. 5% are European. That's 43. So just sort of picture that that body when it comes to any single decision that they're going to have to make at General Conference. It's important to think about that because they're going to be given binary choices, yes or no, on a whole host of things. Second, to pass all of the removal of the language, which the good story is removal of the language stops the harm. Let's not sell that short. Ending the harm is all good. Removal is all good. It's not enough, but it's all good. So to pass that, we need 50% of 862 plus 1. Got your calculators out? That's the 432. Okay? So if there are 483 U.S. delegates, 403 that are centrist progressive, you see we only need 29 more votes from outside the U.S. and that body to pass the removal of the language. It's highly likely. Yes?
What's the spread?
We don't have as good a count, but they would be, in fact, the European United Methodist Church is more conservative than the U.S. But it's not, it'd be more equally divided than the U.S. But Africa is not solely conservative. And that's an important thing for us to always keep in mind. None of these areas are monolithic. They're not of one mind. Take our ideas about diversity and put them on as glasses when we look at any group, any national group, any conference. There's multiple positions held by multiple people in all of them. So it's highly likely that there's plenty of votes to get over the 50% plus 1 for removal, as well as 50% plus 1 for the revision of the social principles. The revision of the social principles is not an unimportant vote. The revision of the social principles will remove the foundational argument that all of the other prohibitions have been built on, and that is the phrase that homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching. It would remove it, because it's not in the new revision. I think you've just done a Lenten series and sermon, and so you've all heard about that. So that's 50% plus 1. So I just want to offer a word of encouragement, cautious optimism, that those items are well within reach. The regionalization, which is an important structural change, but it's a structural change that demands a constitutional amendment, and a constitutional amendment in the United Methodist Church must have 2/3 of the body vote for it. So 66.6% would be 575 votes out of the 862. So if you do the math, and this is where things change, it is not for sure that all conservatives in the U.S. would vote against regionalization. Because there is some among them who understand the problem of a U.S.-centric church in Africa and in the Philippines and in all around the world. And they want to see that change, and they want more autonomy within the U.S. They see the sense, the logic of it. And so that's something to keep in mind for the 575. And then the self-interest that we also have organized for, the caucuses have organized for, is that this is good for Africa. and this is good for the Philippines. So the proposal for regionalization arose out of the Philippines conferences, was joined by the African Central Conferences, and has come through what's called the Standing Committee on Central Conferences, which acts as a legislative section, which considers legislation in a smaller format prior to making a recommendation to the full body of the General Conference. And so the Standing Committee on Central Conferences has amended or adapted the proposal so that it is ready to come from them at their legislative section meeting the first 2 days of General Conference directly into the General Conference plenary. And if it comes with their full support, it comes with more than enough votes to be able to reach that goal too. It's a higher mountain. It's more difficult to predict, but it is highly possible. And as I've already said, there are lots of different reasons to vote for regionalization. But passing regionalization doesn't get it done. There's also the fourth R, as I call it, which the people who frame the messages and talk about the organizing strategies don't like when I say there are 4 R's. But the fourth R is, after you pass regionalization at General Conference, if it passes, it has to be ratified. Right. And ratification happens by votes of annual conferences. How many of you in this room have ever voted at an annual conference in the West Ohio Conference? Hold them all up. So, and if all of you apply again and were chosen again to be at-large or members from Clifton, your vote matters because all of the annual conferences will take a vote on ratification, and after that, all of the votes will be added together from around the world. And after all of the votes from around the world are added together, if 2/3 of the aggregate are in favor of the constitutional amendments, then they become the new structure of the church. That's another high mountain to climb. Sam?
When you speak of regionalization, is that the same as the split that's going to happen?
No. So thank you for asking.
I thought the split had already taken place.
The disaffiliations have taken place. Let me just say, so the disaffiliations were not an official split. They were a locally driven congregational choices to disaffiliate. And so 25% of our congregations left the United Methodist Church. And then one half of them, so about 12.5%, formed a new denomination called the Global Methodist Church.
But those of us who have remained united, why do we still have to conform to the old church? I'll use that term. When we're the new church.
So this gets to, I think, the heart of the question. 75% of the church has stayed. Most of the 75% of those congregations want to be United Methodist, and yet we have a particular structure. That's
75% will accept LGBTQ
in the U.S. for the most part, not 100%, but for the most part in the U.S. The reason for regionalization is that regionalization, as Bobby has already said, restructures the church and restructures power so that the U.S. church, the African Central Conferences, the Filipino Central Conferences would stand with a little more autonomy, detached from the other parts, and not constrained by the other parts and their opinions. So on the one hand, Africa would be able to stand apart from a U.S. church that decided they wanted to fully affirm and embrace LGBTQ folks. And Africa could say, that's the U.S., that's not us. And we could say, they still want to define marriage in the Congo as between one man and one woman. But that's not us. We're going to make a different decision. So that's what regionalization gives us.
Why can't we in the United States establish our own United Methodist Church and establish our own constitution?
Because that's not who we are. It's not who we are, Sam. So we only can do it if we decide that we want to separate from the church that we're currently in, which has a certain structure. Lisa?
I just want to make some comments that might help, because I discovered this too as we went along. Not every church that stayed, not every church that stayed, did not move away, are affirming. They stayed because they need the larger connection, or they stayed for different reasons. So, for example, at our annual conference last year, we certainly had the vote for the affirming things that we wanted to talk about, but we still had to listen to harmful arguments and so forth. So that's still happening. That was heart-wrenching to me. I didn't think it was going to be that way. But there are still churches that are United Methodists that are not affirming. Does that help?
Well, and thus far, Sam, we're still under what the rules were before. Like, we have the opportunity to address those rules, but where we're at right now, we didn't leave anything. They left and did their own thing. We're still who we were before, but this is an effort to start to address those issues. Nope.
Don't we wish. So, yeah. So I think it leads to also the idea that the General Conference fixes anything. It raises the question whether the General Conference, by its actions, fixes anything. And this is real life ministry for LGBTQ persons happens on the local level. It happens by congregations like Clifton. A change at Charlotte may catch a little bit of press, may give a little bit of a better story for a week or two, and may have some residual ripples in the larger church over time. But the place where change happens is local. It's whether we can can continue to grow the LGBTQ affirming Methodist community.
And I think to some extent what David's getting at there, I'm not trying to woman-splain David, but I just realized what I was doing. You can't legislate welcome, you can't legislate, it's no different than women's rights, it's no different than race relations. That legislation can happen, but it takes the movement on the ground to really affect change. And yeah. Are we ready for Q&A?
Marty?
Oh, Marty.
I don't want to talk very long because you don't know me, but I'm Marty Swords Horrell. I just retired last June 30th from 40 years of ministry mostly in Upper New York, which is a new conference that's only been around since 2010. And there were 5 conferences in New York State and 4 of them combined. But if you know anything about geography, if you stand on the Canadian border and look south at New York State, you have this incredible microcosm of the United Methodist Church in this country, where you have some of the most conservative people in your U.S. on your right hand, and you have some of the most progressive United Methodists in the former Troy Conference on your left, and you look straight down the middle, those are all the moderates. And on our right hand, we didn't lose, I think we only lost 15% in the Northeast jurisdiction, because I served on the jurisdiction. This is the second time I've been a delegate. I was a delegate in Fort Worth in 2008 in the General Conference. But the right hand, lots of those churches in what we call the southern tier of New York, which is really almost part of the Midwest, that's where we lost any, if we lost very few any place else. But, and I know this is being recorded, so I'm choosing my words carefully, among our delegation there are 2 or possibly 3 that I'm a little surprised are still with us, is UMC. But my role, as Robert said during the service twice, I was elected in 2019 as a jurisdictional delegate, and then someone resigned just in the end of January this year, who was a full clergy, whatever. And so I was moved up into the General Conference delegation, but I'm still considered a reserve delegate, so I may or may not ever be on the floor. So I'm going to be using primarily my pastoral skills, because in our conference, the reserve delegates, their job is to take care of the team. And I'll be convening them every night, the 5 clergy, 5 lay who are on the floor, and kind of helping them debrief. And among them will be some folks who, we are not all of one mind. Definitely not in this delegation. So it'll take a lot of listening and conflict transformation, hopefully, to help sometimes the Holy Spirit can do some amazing things, God bless, right? That people's minds may change just within the time of the conference. And in those 40 years, I was just counting up this morning, for some reason, I served 2 congregations who had been reconciling when I got there, and then there were 2 others who were well on the way toward it, and then did the vote shortly after I left. So out of the 40 years, that's 21 years that I served reconciling congregations. As I said, not completely right. One of them the last one I was there, in Oneonta, was the 5th reconciling church in the denomination in 1989. So they had a lot to teach me, which I was it was a small college town in the Catskills, not a big congregation, but very similar to Clifton in many ways. But the only other thing I wanted to say was thank you so much for your welcome here. And my husband, Dana, is also a retired United Methodist clergy. And, we've been kind of traveling around. We go to Gaines quite a bit. We go to Hyde Park. We've been to New Vision. It's just fun for us to kind of sample the wonderful smorgasbord of terrific congregations you all have here in the Cincinnati area, and just we're getting to. But thank you for, as Robert said this morning, you received 9 new members last month here, and you're just such a vibrant and active, and I think you're doing everything right, honestly. And but as you know, I think you all know polity really well, that clergy in the United Methodist Church do not belong to the local church. We belong to the annual conference. That is our church. So I will never be joining your church, but I have joined the choir and have enjoyed. And I'm sorry I'm so loud and obnoxious sometimes, but it's kind of fun when you're retired. You can kind of do stuff. And what are they going to do to you, right? Heckle the preacher. And that's really. But thank you again for your welcome and for your embrace of Dana and me. And we'll kind of float in and out. And we're going to do a lot of traveling. And we were in Colombia studying Spanish in January. And we have grandkids in California. And one on the way who's going to be here in Cincinnati. Woo! So anyway, I probably am not the person to answer questions, although I'm very grateful that I'm getting to know Bobby, and I'll get to know many of the other West Ohio folks, I'm sure, as we get to Charlotte on April 23rd to May 3rd. And Q&A.
Q&A.
Robert, I'm just curious, does it take ordination to heckle the pastor? Because I've been doing it for a long time. Okay.
Very, very different DNA here.
Not here.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I understand everything. The regionalization vote, okay, if it passes, will not take effect until ratification. So when we're talking about passing the removal of the language, is the fact that, yes, that is something that would affect everyone or just the United? Okay, that's everyone. So I know you said that part of the strategy to have it just be removal in order for conferences that maybe, because that is the one place right now that there's more consensus.
Would you pass out the paper?
I think
Oh,
he
you
did.
passed it out,
He did.
okay.
Now I forget exactly what you said. So
Doesn't
the
affect everybody.
yes. So the removal of language, part of the thought there is get everybody to neutral, and then if there are places that want to put stuff back in, Lord be with you. But we have the opportunity to then start fresh and add affirmation potentially after. The piece that David was saying about the revised social principles and taking out the incompatible phrase, the revised social principles are not a part of the book of discipline that can be revised locally, so or regionally. Sorry. So getting that to neutral, but the cool thing about the revised social principles, the last however many years since they happened. No, since they happened originally.
50 years, since 68.
They've been nitpicked and a phrase here and a phrase there changed and edited. But this year in 8 or 6, whatever, some year, the years don't matter anymore. Some year they initiated a movement to rewrite them entirely.
2016.
Thank you. He knows his years. I don't. To rewrite them entirely. So rather than trying to edit this piece and this piece and this piece, they just scrapped the whole thing and wrote a new one with lots of international conversation, with lots of international voices and writers and everything. So the hope is that can go through rather than anything related to the old ones, which aren't even really on the table.
So there's a whole new
Man.
Yes.
So on July 1st, following the votes at General Conference, anything that's passed, like the social principles or the removals, those go into effect on July 1. The things that don't go into effect are things that are linked to the constitutional amendments related to regionalizations, which require ratification. And the ratification happens at annual conference level. And those are scheduled not just the way we do in the US, not just in May and June, but they happen throughout the year around the globe. And so it'll be a full year of voting before they can come up with the aggregate number and know whether they have passed.
So, just to go back with that. So, if we become regionalized and it ratifies and is ratified, then we can make changes to the discipline just as a U.S. Central Conference.
Close enough. It's very close to it.
The parts of the discipline that are not global. So like the social principles are going to be a global piece. So we wouldn't be allowed to simply change that. But but there's a whole lot of the Book of Discipline that would become very contextualized to the region that it's in. So, as Bobby already mentioned, if there's building and zoning law that has to be abided by in England, you know, well, England doesn't have a Methodist. So in Norway, you know, they could make it unique to Norway, and it would be different from those sort of building policies that we'd have in the U.S.
Other questions? Question, Shirley, and then Janet. Shirley, question? Yep.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Reverend David. Now, let's suppose things go favorably at this general conference coming up. And I guess you'd be particularly sensitive to what I'm about to ask here. Do you think, in your opinion, anybody on the panel, it would provide some sort of, for lack of a better word, protection against some of the aggression, some of the stuff that had been going on?
Do you mean specifically, Shirley, like charges and trials?
Trials, and maybe flat out some protection for some of the harassment that certain people have been getting too.
David, would you like to?
It's an easy answer, yes. It really would. It would really put a sort of a barrier to those continuing. Does that mean it's going to stop them? No. There's still going to be efforts, and there's going to be people, and there's going to be stuff, and it's going to be messy, but there will not be any protection for that kind of behavior by the Book of Discipline. And that's a good thing. Yeah. But not the harmful attitudes and actions that some people will bring.
Yeah, I think you should just always remember that the Book of Discipline is a snapshot. I mean, General Conference every 4 years, this has been 8 years, is one of their main jobs is to revise the Book of Discipline. I mean, you're not going to revise the whole thing, but pretty much, am I wrong? Everything in the discipline is up for grabs. So the Holy Spirit has lots of opportunity to make things right. And the other thing I was asked to cover real quick, anyone, not just people who are in Charlotte, can follow the proceedings on the General Conference website if you would like. It's just gc2020.umc.org. The first 5 days, April 23rd to 27th, all the delegates will be in legislative sessions. There's 11 different legislative committees. And then there's a day of Sabbath, Sunday the 28th. And then the last 5 days are all plenaries. And so just so you know what to pray for and who to pray for, and you know. Yeah, go ahead.
Question to Janet, and then we'll come back to Lisa.
I had a friend who was not able to be ordained in West Ohio Conference, and so she jumped the pond and was ordained in the British Methodist Church. So I know there are different Methodist outreaches. Where do our friends from Medellin and Colombia fit into this scheme of things?
Great question. Does our panel want to answer that? Marty?
I think they're autonomous, aren't they? Part of the autonomous church, so they don't have a vote. I'm sorry?
So currently, the Colombian Methodist Church is in its formation stages. So they're not even a concordat relationship with the United Methodist Church yet, but they're in conversations about all of that. And so the way that could happen, which would be a lovely thing, is the way that the Côte d'Ivoire United Methodist became United Methodist. I mean, they weren't particularly Wesleyan in their format, but when the motion was put before the General Conference to receive them as part of the United Methodist Church, a process was put in place, and then they became part of the United Methodist Church. And the same thing could happen in Colombia. Especially if our missionaries.
Lisa? Yeah.
So I have a concern and a question. And the concern is we have churches, and not just little churches, that aren't talking about this at all, that aren't talking about General Conference. Their parishioners know very little to nothing. Is our bishop encouraging pastors to be talking about General Conference? We don't have that problem here. No. Oh. Okay. Broad answer.
I will say that Bishop Palmer and the cabinet, who are extensions of the bishop, have helped to create some resources for local churches through district and annual conference communication channels that have been made available. And that has been kind of the extent to which I personally have received any communication about encouraging pastors or lay leaders or members of the annual conference to talk about General Conference. That's very diplomatic. Right?
Because he's being recorded.
You're retired. You can say whatever you want.
Well, I mean, it's partly the dilemma of whether it's, and Clifton faces this all the time, whether it's come to us and get what we're offering here, or whether you go out and meet people in the world and the community around you. Clifton's making deliberate choices about moving outside of this sanctuary to meet and engage other people. And I think our conference in this moment is operating still out of the fear that there's going to be pushback. And so they just lift things up and invite people into them. And so interested people come. But the general populace gets very little information. And that's back to an earlier point about how important it is for us to continue to be emissaries, advocates, to be the folks who talk to friends and neighbors and get them to do things like this in their churches. Witness.
Okay, I see Shirley's hand. Shirley's had a chance. Has anyone? Leland, and then we'll go to Shirley, okay?
So the Bishop of Virginia released a missive a week or so ago, and it said something like, this is my paraphrase, it said something like, if you're worried that things are going to change, don't worry. We won't appoint a gay pastor to you if you don't want one. You don't have to conduct same-sex weddings if you don't want to, no matter if all the 3 R's pass. And so, Sue Laurie has already said the 3 R's aren't enough, and this is more of the same. How would you all respond to the bishop and to Sue?
Great question. Thank you, Leland. Bobby?
So I think the message from the bishops, from a variety of bishops, has been, we're not going to send a gay pastor where they're not. Bishop Palmer's comment over and over again in some of his things is that he never tries to make a bad appointment. And so sending a gay pastor into a situation that's not going to be okay is not his goal. And I don't think there's like hundreds of gay pastors knocking on the door. There are some, but like enough to fill all the churches is simply not.
It's our prayer, but it's not a reality. We're recruiting.
But his comment over and over has been he has no desire to make a bad appointment. For everyone's benefit, that gay clergy person and that community. The church's line about marriage, they keep coming back to, no pastor has to do any marriage, and they can always, one of the things I read was like, they can just say they're busy that day. They can, whatever. They can have a multitude of reasons that they can't or won't do that service. Without necessarily saying that that's why. I don't disagree with Sue that it's not enough. Of course. But, I mean, same as I said at the beginning, like, neutral's a start.
Oh, go ahead, Marty.
Very quickly, if you look at, I went to a non-denominational Yale Divinity School, so we had lots of denominations, people going to ministry from there in the 80s, that was a long time ago, but 70s. Anyway, it doesn't matter. United Methodism has always had a better track record for appointing folk from other cultures, women, because the bishop can send someone if they think they're somewhat open. I'll just speak from my own very brief experience in Chicago. When I took my first appointment, I was in Chicago, and I followed a woman there, and when she went to that church in the inner city of Chicago, the congregation, DS went there, blah, 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 having a conversation about what would be a good appointment. And they said, well, send us anyone as long as it's not a woman. And they sent my friend Leanne because she had the best gifts and graces for the congregation and its life at that time. And she was there, I don't know, not a long, long time, but she did a bang-up wonderful job. And then the DS came back, same DS, had the same conversation. Who should we, what do you think now? What kind of pastor do you think you would most benefit? And they said, you can send us anyone as long as it's a woman. And I got to go there. Wasn't that great? That was my first appointment. So I'm not saying I don't want to see any LGBTQ folk being like sacrificial lambs, but if the congregation is at least even a little bit open to it, that can happen. And that's happened with people of color, where you have cross-cultural appointments. In our system, that can happen, because, again, the Holy Spirit is amazing.
A couple of things I would say, Leland. I think we need to give feedback to bishops who get it wrong. Right. And I believe her response was a response that bought the frame that was given to her in a question, instead of being a bishop and saying, let me talk to you about our polity. Let me talk to you about how appointments are made. And that we have your best interest as a congregation at heart. And we have the life and the gifts and the affirmations of LGBTQ clergy at heart. And like Bishop Palmer has said, we are going to make the best appointments possible. And because it's an appointive system, you will need to trust us that we will do that for you. Because we're not congregational. But for all of the good things she said in some of what she did, it fell short of that. And so it's not, the 3 R's are not enough, clearly not enough to really get to full liberation for LGBTQ folks and for justice in the United Methodist Church. Clearly not. And we just need to keep saying that while achieving real good for LGBTQ folks, because these steps are good steps.
I go Chris here.
Just going to make a brief comment. My former church is getting smaller and smaller. People have been there for generations, families, and descendants. And we've had a series of great pastors who've been very liberal and very accepting, and but things don't change, and they worry about why they're not getting new members, and younger people don't want to come there, but things never change. So last annual conference, our new minister asked for a vote about how people felt about being LGBTQ accepting, and it was, as I would expect, 50-50. And
let me speak to that. Thanks. If you look at the document that was shared, you'll see the board members for the Reconciling Ministry Network. So, and then as you read that document, you'll see the focus and the mission statements for Reconciling Ministry Network. It includes a deep commitment to intersectional work and to anti-racist work. And hopefully you'll see in that particular, those photos of that board, the kind of thing that you're describing, Shirley. And at General Conference, there is a coalition called the Love Your Neighbor Coalition, known affectionately as LYNC, L-Y-N-C. But the Love Your Neighbor Coalition includes all of our ethnic caucuses, Methodist Federation for Social Action, Reconciling Ministries Network, United Women in Faith, the Accessibility Caucus. I mean, just all of those groups working collaboratively, Climate Justice Group, all working collaboratively, because when you think intersectionally, there are LGBT folks in all of those groups, and there are people of color and people with differing abilities and people with different interests in RMN and MFSA and all of the other groups. And so if we're really going to be about this together, in the best sense of what it means to be a United Methodist Church, big umbrella church with everybody and all of our variations, then we have to just start acting like it. We've got to start working together. And then helping each other. So I believe that's where we're headed, Shirley, and thank you for the question. One other thing about BMCR, for all of us who are tired of the journey to get to justice and inclusion in United Methodist Church, I took away much strength from the BMCR caucus. Well, but in 1968, the central jurisdiction was eliminated. And so in some ways, the African American voice and people were diluted into the larger United Methodist denomination, which was predominantly white. And those folks talk about how they can be the church and call for justice and stick with it, even when they are a very small minority within the larger denomination. So when it comes to LGBTQ folks, we are a very small minority in the larger church. It's only because of allies and friends that we might get to pass a few things that'll make a difference. But because of that, the call to us and our journey is really a journey about how do we persist and how do we persevere and how do we become the church that we believe the larger United Methodist Church needs to be, and not base our spiritual lives on our inclusion or exclusion by some external authority.
That's a perfect segue. I'm going to invite Aaron to come forward and share an opportunity, an invitation for us to support Reconciling Ministries, not only with our prayers and with but also with financial commitment. So, Aaron.
Thank you, Robert. I think I know everyone here. You know I'm the seminary intern, right, at this church.
Is this the uniform?
This is the uniform. Love you, David. So at seminary, I'm taking a class at the Marion Correctional Institution. That's a prison. And one of the things we've been talking about is what is the difference between criminal justice and restorative justice. And restorative justice, you can sort of read between the lines what that probably means, but that the two parties come together and there's an agreed upon idea about how to move forward, and both agree how they can feel heard. There was not really an answer in the class as to how we should solve that in the United States, like how we could transform our criminal justice system. There wasn't anything about that. It's just an ongoing conversation. I can say with some authority, the Christ in me can say, that me standing here as a trans person asking trans and queer allies and other LGBTQ people for money to solve the problem of harm caused by a denomination is not restorative justice. It's not. Otherwise, if it was, Instead of you sitting here, it would be all the people who left the church. And they would be flooding us with money. But that's not the case. So I'm here to ask you to give some money to help support the Reconciling Ministries Network at the General Conference, and that apparently they needs a lot of money to help with hospitality and to do many other things that I don't know about at the conference. And that it is very, very vital that their work is very important, and it does feel like we are on the verge of actual change, and it feels remarkable. So I invite you to give, even if it's $1, and Robert is holding up the envelope. Okay. Yeah.
Whatever envelope Robert gave you works.
We can go now. Okay. Do you want to say hello?
So if folks would prefer to give electronically, you can do that through Realm, and it'll show right up here on the screen. You can designate your giving to Reconciling Ministries Network offering, and all of that will be designated for Reconciling for General Conference. Yep. And if you would like to be part of a sustaining effort, you can make a regular gift through the Reconciling Ministries offering. If you do that within the next 10 days, you can also have some way to indicate support for Reverend David Meredith, who has a fundraising effort that he's personally taken on for General Conference. Do you want to speak to that, David, real quick?
Just wanted to say, some of the bills aren't going to come until the middle of May, so it gives you a whole month to make your gift if you want to do that. I'll just say a word about some of the things that your gifts will make a difference to do. RMN is the only organization nationally that has expansive staff, and so 3 organizers of paid for and their benefits provided by Reconciling Ministry Network have been working since 2019 to really organize internationally, to travel internationally, to work across the U.S., to build a coalition that can accomplish the goals that are before us, which included getting progressive delegates elected in 2020 and bishops elected in 2022. Was that when we did that? Yeah, 2022, fall of 2022. So, they've done a whole lot of work. And so you help to support them as well as all of the very specific things that happen at General Conference. There will be, just so you know, there will be a couple of things you want to tune in to from RMN during the second week. We don't know what day the legislation is going to be completed regarding removal and or affirmations of LGBTQ folks. But on the day that those legislative actions are completed at the plenary, there will be that night an online and live in person in Charlotte celebration event. So please watch for it, stay tuned. And then also on Saturday morning, May 4th, there will be a Thanksgiving and commissioning service that will be in person and live streamed, because even though we will be thankful for what we've accomplished, we will be commissioned for what we also need to do, like ratification and a whole bunch of other things, growing, reconciling congregations, developing leadership, fighting systemic injustice. So please stay tuned to those things.
Okay. Sorry. May the 4th be with you, Jeff, and also with you. Friends, can we say thank you to our panelists for their wisdom and their time? And I want to say thank you to you all for your commitment to this work. It is an honor to serve at Clifton United Methodist Church. So go forth to love and serve. Amen. And witness.